Karen? Good morning, everyone. We're back at New York Avenue Church of Christ on a Sunday morning. This is the third week. We will be in Daniel chapter 3 this week. This week we have one of the main things people think about when they think about Daniel. This week we have the blazing hot furnace and the image of gold. Why don't we start off by reading the actual scripture, and then we'll start breaking some things down and answering a few questions that people commonly have from the third chapter of Daniel. It starts out, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the advisors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officers assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship immediately will be thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of all those instruments, all the nations, people of every language fell down and worshipped the image of God that King Nebuchadnezzar had worshipped the image of gold. I think I said God when I was reading there. But the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your Majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of all those instruments must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your Majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up." Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men who were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of these instruments and music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into a blazing furnace, then the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your mighty hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your Majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude towards them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in the army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. And I do find verse 24 funny here, but it says, "The king's command was so urgent that the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that were tied up and thrown into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, your majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of God's." I do find that a little bit funny. If we have them thrown into the furnace, and he jumps up, and the first thing he says, "Why is there 4 guys walking around in there?" Instead of not, "There's people still alive walking around in there." I just find that humorous as his train of thought there. And so in verse 25, he said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like the son of God's." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was the hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and has rescued his servants. They trusted him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any little god, G, except their own big G, God. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Okay, that was a lot, wasn't it? But there's different thoughts and things that come up during that, and that we're going to cover. Where was Daniel? Well, all right, we'll talk about that. Why all of a sudden, in verse 2 we have Nebuchadnezzar blown away and talking about how great the God is of Daniel, then all of a sudden he's building this golden image. Well, first of all, what was the golden image? There's a lot of different questions that percolate up, as well as what can we take from this chapter. But before we get into that, just a side note. Babylonian culture was polytheistic, meaning multiple gods, and they were actually very inclusive of new gods. It was not surprising for them to just accept, okay, well, these people worship this god, well, we'll worship this god too, along with all the other gods we have. Now, they were okay with the Jews worshiping Yahweh, as long as they also acknowledged the Babylonian gods and the supremacy of the king's state religion. So the conflict arose with Judaism's monotheism. In other words, there's only one God, and we're not supposed to worship other little g gods, if you will. And y'all realize what I'm talking about when I say little g and big G gods. Little g gods are, all these other non-God. And when I say big G God, it means our God in heaven, our Creator. So anyway, let's, side note, we talk about cubits and stuff, ancient measurements. What are we really talking about? That statue was about 90 feet tall by about 10 feet wide at the base. Some claim it was built on a big base and stuff. Does it matter? No, just throwing that out there, because sometimes, people wonder, exactly how big was that? So that's about how big it was. We don't know exactly what it looked like. We don't know if it was in the image of a person or what. the text just simply doesn't say exactly what it looked like or necessarily what it represented. Most people think that it was probably Babylon's Patreon gods like Marduk or Nabu, but it doesn't tell us, so it doesn't matter. It could be anything any idol, because that's really what these were. It could be any idol that anyone was worshiping. Another side note that some people have talked about, which again we don't know, but it is an interesting side note. Some wonder if it was actually an image of basically Nebuchadnezzar, or Nebuchadnezzar's ego got too much for him. Because we know just in Daniel chapter 2, Daniel's talking about, you are the head of gold on this statue. And some people have said, well, it was a golden image. Wonder if we don't know. Could have been. Doesn't change the fact of anything. But there you go. We don't know. We don't really know. Now, a lot of people ask the question, why is Daniel not in this chapter? Logical question, right? Why isn't Daniel in this chapter? Did he bow down? No. Contextually, there's no way you would be able to say that he bowed down, because we know coming up here in a few chapters, he refuses and he prays to God and he gets thrown into the lion's den. They try to kill him. So why would he do it here and then not do it there? And everything that has been going on with him leading up to this. Matter of fact, God saved his life in the last chapter with the understanding of the dream. So, where was he? Truthfully, we don't know. Logically, we can look at it. We know a couple of things. That he was appointed in a very high administrative position, right? It just happened. It just happened in the last chapter. He had a lot of new responsibilities. Just looking back and thinking of things, I know many of y'all have worked in the corporate world and stuff. I remember I took over the engineering group at Chelsea Market when I was working here. Well, one of the first things I had to do was go there, meet everybody, have a sit down, talk about everything going on and so forth. Logically, a lot of people have come to the conclusion that more than likely, Daniel was traveling in his new position, in his new role, to meet the people that were working for him and getting things set up. I mean, it's kind of logical, right? There are some say, well, maybe he was exempted. Maybe he was. I personally believe that he was not there, and that he was more than likely away on governmental business. It's the way governments and companies and so forth work today. Personally, to me, that makes the most sense. Some say that this was a targeted accusation at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and that the people that the Chaldeans that made the accusation against them knew that Daniel was able to basically save their skin, because they would have been killed if Daniel wasn't able to interpret the dream and know what the dream is. And they were, well, Daniel's in too high a position. We better not say anything about him. Let's talk about these. The only drawback with that is Daniel was associated with them. Do you think Daniel's just going to stand back and go, whatever? No. Just side note about what people talk about and so forth. And of course, we know from chapter 1 as well, Daniel didn't eat the meat. So that was another thing. So what can we learn from chapter 3 that might be able, that is able to help us if we do that? Here's the first one that came up that I have this morning is sometimes could be difficult. And it would be good for us to develop an even if, quote unquote, faith. We notice there that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were threatened with death. They declared that God could save them. But even if he doesn't, they still would not worship the king's idols. This should teach us as believers in God that even if the outcome is something we don't want, or maybe even if the outcome is different than we prayed for or expected, that we need to understand, realize, and know that God is in control. And we have to trust in God and keep his commandments. So, when things don't go our way, which happens, I don't think there's probably anybody here that everything they wanted to happen and so forth throughout their life is exactly what happened, and God has given them everything they've wanted. We have to remember, we have to have an even if. Even if. Bob prays often when he's praying. He said, he prays often, Father, we just ask you to heal them as you see fit. And, I respect that a lot. That is an even if. That is an even if, especially when you're talking about someone that is sick and it's someone you love. Father, heal them as you see fit. And we should follow that up with, and Father, help us to have complete faith in you, that you will be with us no matter, that you will help us through this no matter how you heal someone. Specifically, y'all know what I'm talking about. Probably the vast majority of us here have lost a loved one and could lose more. So that's something for us to seriously think about. Have an even if. And the next thing we can look at in this is we need to be able to stand firm against the crowd. Other words, we need to stand peer pressure. Don't let peer pressure get to you. You've heard that as a teen, but it's not just a teen thing. It's your whole life thing. We need to be willing to make a stand to do the right thing. We see them here standing up saying, no, we're not going to do that. Sorry, we're not going to do it. There was a lot of pressure on them, weren't they? Literally the threat of death, and they remained faithful. Would we always be faithful? I think of Ethiopia right now and all the Christians being killed. There was a minister the other day, and 8 or 9 members of his family were slaughtered. They weren't able to kill him, but he's continued preaching. We don't have to think about stuff like that here in the United States. But there are people in this world that face that every day. God is with you in the fire. I love that statement. We need to remember that from this chapter as well. He doesn't prevent Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from being thrown in the furnace. But he's there with them. Just like we know we're going to go through hard times in life. Right? We may not want to go through hard times in life. Let's see a show of hands. Who wants to go through hard stuff in life? See, I've learned. You ask the question no one raises their hand to get a unanimous thing. None of us want to go through hard times, but all of us will go through hard times or have been through hard times. And we have to know that God is there with us in those difficult times. Sometimes we're panicking about what we're going through and we're trying to figure it out on our own and delay going to God and asking for help or recognizing He's there with us. And all that's doing is making it hard on ourselves. So we need to remember to go to God early and often. Courage and conviction. Faith requires boldness. They didn't compromise or make excuses to save themselves. They didn't not show up hoping they wouldn't be noticed. They showed up like they were instructed. We also need to remember our witness impacts others. You might not realize it. You might not think, oh, this is not that big a deal, but as Christians, people are watching us. People know us. People love to throw accusation and throw stones about Christians. I mean, you have one minister having an affair with somebody in the church, it's going to be on the news. But you have one boss in a corporate setting, or you have 100 bosses in a corporate setting having an affair with someone else, that's never on the news. Why is that? Because they like to throw stones at Christians, metaphorically, of course. Now, some may have wondered why did they throw them in a fiery furnace? Why did, later on, does Daniel get thrown in a lion's den? What's the difference? What's the difference? Why are they just trying to come up with, maybe if we try to feed them to lions, we can't throw them in the fire because, well, that didn't work last time, so maybe we feed them to lions. That's actually not the case at all. We need to remember between chapters 5 and chapter 6, we had the fall of the Babylonians and the Medes and the Persians took over. So there was a regime change, if you will. Now, the Babylonians used the burning of the furnace. The Medes and the Chaldeans used the lion's dens. The Babylonians preferred fire, if you will. They actually had an old code of Hammurabi, the foundational law code of Babylon, that explicitly decreed burning as a penalty for various crimes, including temple theft, certain forms and sacrilege. Jeremiah 29:22 also notes that King Nebuchadnezzar had previously killed 2 men, Zechariah and Ahab, in fire. But the Persians, on the other hand, they practiced Zoroastrianism, a religion that viewed fire and earth as sacred elements. To burn a human body would be to contaminate the sacred fire. Therefore, they used non-fire methods for execution, such as throwing criminals to wild animals. So that's why there's 2 different execution things here in Daniel. We have to remember there was a regime change, literally from the head of gold to the chest and shoulders of silver, change between chapter 5 and chapter 6. And I'll remind you all of that when we get to chapter 6 and Daniel gets thrown in the lion's den. So there we go. That's Daniel chapter 3. Thank y'all for being with us this morning. Hopefully you can be with us here in about 20 minutes or 15 minutes when we get started at worship. We love you all. Hope to see you on site soon. Bye-bye. Yes, sir.